we are switching our attention to the NFL. I'm delighted to say Mike Carlson is with us. Mike, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning, Ger. I'm okay. Did you say Wayne Rooney's going to become the coach of Washington?
Is he not already? the Commanders. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's in town. He's available. Why not?
Well, I think he might at least know what the playoff ramifications are if they get beaten at the weekend.
They're already gone, which is more than Ron Rivera appeared to know. Although I think he might have been trying to be ironically smart with the reporter. Who knows?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. Obviously, the big story in the NFL at the moment is the health of Damar Hamlin. There hasn't been that much of an update really in the last 24 hours. They've confirmed that there's been a cardiac arrest, that his condition is critical but stable, but there's been no update.
No, one of his relatives came out and basically said, that it was. I think the only question now is whether or not there was brain damage in the time that his heart had stopped pumping. I don't think his life is in danger at this stage. But the question will be how much oxygen the brain lost over that time, and obviously that's a critical one. But I think they'll probably just leave him until they know that his vitals are so secure. There's no danger in waking him up.
What have you made of the coverage? There's a spat between ESPN and the NFL about whether or not the NFL were going to ask the players to go back out. That seems like a little bit of a sideshow to me. It's almost like the mass industrial complex of reporters on the NFL need to talk about something, and a row between the broadcaster and the organisation, or does it speak to something more important?
I think that there's a little bit of importance, because it was Troy Vincent, who's an executive vice president of the NFL and used to be a player, who came out and said we never considered restarting the game. And obviously, up until the point they made the decision to first postpone and then cancel the game, they were considering it. By definition, until you make a decision not to, you're considering it. And the ESPN people have a ex-NFL referee in their studio, and he was in contact with the lead. And I'm sure somebody somewhere along the line, somebody on site, thought that once the field was clear, as usually happens with injuries, even serious ones, that the game would restart, and someone told the teams to do that. Troy Vincent was blaming. He said, well, it might have been the players or the coaches. They don't do that on their own. And you're right in the sense that it's not really an issue. Just say, yeah, well, it became obvious to us that, that this situation was having such an effect on both teams, players and coaches, that we couldn't continue it. And so we dropped the plans then. And nobody would say, oh, that was the wrong thing to do, or you should have done it 5 minutes earlier or 10 minutes earlier or whatever. But the NFL is so defensive in these situations that they want to try to head off any criticism, and I think that's pretty much what the problem is. And frankly, there hasn't been they haven't had any experience with this. The only player who's ever died on a field was 1971. It was Chuck Hughes. I remember this, and he just collapsed on the field, no hit, nothing like that. It turned out that he had arteriosclerosis. His arteries were blocked, and he'd been complaining about this and gone to the hospital the week before, and they said there's nothing wrong with you, and he simply wasn't getting any blood. So I don't think there's a playbook here, but certainly with the players behaving the way they were, that stopping the game was the right decision, and it puts them in a bit of a bind now as to what happens with the last week of the season.
What are the potential outcomes? Do they just declare the game a tie and move on? Is that possible?
Something like that, yeah, or just a non-game. No result. I can't see them adding another week to this, just to play this one game. Because that would kind of throw everything else into chaos in terms of their playoff schedules and indeed the Super Bowl schedule. But the effect it has now is that if Buffalo win this week playing the Patriots, assuming that their players are playing really well at that point. But if Kansas City win, Kansas City would then become the top seed by basically half a game. In what they say in baseball terms, a better winning percentage. The Bengals appear to be locked into the third seed as a result of not playing. The Patriots might have been thinking that Buffalo would have the first seed sewn up with a win over Cincinnati, and therefore Buffalo wouldn't play them very hard because they're right now the only win and in team for the single playoff place that remains in the AFC. And it's interesting because usually the NFL tries to avoid letting teams find out what they need to do on the last week of the season, if they can. But the way they set it up this year with Kansas City playing on Saturday, that would mean that Buffalo would know whether or not they needed to win to keep the top seed on Sunday. And Tennessee and Jacksonville obviously play on Saturday, and that's a win and in for either team. And it's a bit, Las Vegas, not Las Vegas, but Seattle will, if they win, that will take Detroit out of playoff contention in the last game of the weekend against Green Bay. If Seattle lose, then the winner of that game would go in. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly how they would remedy this in any way. And it's such a freak. Such a freak occurrence in this kind of a game. And I remember as well in '98 Chris Pronger of the Chicago Blackhawks NHL team. This is 25 years ago now. Playoff game against Detroit, and Dmitry Mironov. As hockey players do, he left the guy that he was holding and punching on and stuff, and sort of slid out toward Dmitry Mironov, who was coming in to take a shot. And Mironov took a hard slap shot, and Pronger, being a hockey player, not a football player, soccer player, stood in front of the shot and let it hit him in the chest. And it hit him in the chest, and exactly the same thing happened. He took about 2 strides and then collapsed, and his heart had stopped beating. He was out for about 20 seconds, they said, but he was fine. He actually played 4 days later. But that's about the closest equivalent I can think to this situation. And it's one of those kind of freak occurrences where the hit is hard enough and in the right spot at just the time that your heart's pumping and stop pumping, and it continues that. So I don't think in bigger terms there's anything much the NFL can do in terms of like changing rules or trying to protect players from this. It really is just a freak occurrence. And when you watch the hit, it's not a huge hit. It's T. Higgins puts his head down, hits him with his shoulders in the chest, but it's just too hard at the wrong time.
Yeah, it's like obviously horrific for the Bills and for his family and for anybody who's ever met him, and it's completely overshadowed what was bubbling to a conclusion, which is all of the big guns that the NFL would want to be involved in the first weekend of the playoffs were going to be there. We had Tom Brady in. It looks like we have Aaron Rodgers in, and his team are surging. Dallas has a good team. The Giants are back. The big markets are doing really well. The traditional storied franchise of the 49ers are on a roll with a superstar trade that they made in the middle of the season, and Mr. Irrelevant. Like it looked like it was actually bubbling up to be the perfect NFL season.
Yeah, and it's been such a strange season, and there's such an awful lot of mediocrity in the league. That we used to say the league wanted every team to finish 8-8, and then they would have to go down to the 23rd tiebreaker to decide who gets into the playoffs. But because of the 17-game season, now you get 9-8. You have to be either 9-8 or 8-9 at the end of the year for those spots. But the glamour players are all there. This Buffalo-Cincinnati game was a great one, or was going to be a great one, because the young quarterbacks who've now taken over from Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, neither of whom has looked particularly effective even during these runs of success that they've had in the last few weeks. And Herbert in the Los Angeles Chargers is there as well. So the playoffs were actually shaping up to be very, very interesting indeed. And the team that had been the best team in the league for most of the season, Philadelphia, Jalen Hurts has been out. They've lost the last 2 games. The fans booed them in the first quarter. With the team standing at 13 wins and 2 losses, and that's why I love Philadelphia. And really, the only team kind of like in dive position right now is Minnesota. And maybe the Ravens. So yeah, I agree. I think the playoffs were shaping up very, very nicely and exactly as the NFL would have wanted to see. And now I don't know how much of a shadow this will throw over the whole playoff scheme. I kind of suspect it won't. A week is a long time in football, as Harold Wilson said, I think. And I think that even the Bills will probably be ready to play on Sunday against the Patriots. And to be honest, Patriots fans will probably be saying, "Oh, it's a bad break because they probably wouldn't have played their best team against us." No, but they don't deserve to be in the playoffs anyway. So I don't think it matters one way or the other.
This Giants story, Mike, is quite incredible. That win over the Colts, thrashing of the Colts the weekend was really, really impressive, especially when it's year one of a new regime. You would have thought at the start of the year, if they make the playoffs, that's their target for the year achieved, but sounds like they want to go further. What can this Giants team do?
It's a really good question, and I was, about 3 weeks into the season, I was declaring Brian Daboll the coach of the year, and then other things happened, and people were behind Nick Sirianni in Philadelphia, or maybe Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco. But I think he really is the coach of the year in the NFL. This was a team that not only was horrible roster-wise in terms of strength, but also salary cap hell. There was not much flexibility they could do with to improve the team, and he's done it by coaching. They have basically been the kind of team that hangs in games, makes it hard for you to win, tries to simply work the clock, control possession, and keep themselves in a position to be in sort of a one-score game toward the end of the year. They've been lucky that Saquon Barkley has been healthy for virtually the whole year for the first time in about 4 seasons. And he's managed Daniel Jones just as he managed as offensive coordinator in Buffalo, Josh Allen. Daboll basically kept Allen in an offense that would emphasize his strengths and minimize his weaknesses. People said you can't coach accuracy in a quarterback, but he appeared to do that perfectly. And it's kind of what he's done with Daniel Jones. They've avoided Daniel Jones's biggest single problem, which is turnovers and standing in the pocket. What we saw from Jones against Indianapolis, he ran for almost 100 yards. He looked a little bit like a minor league version of Josh Allen in those circumstances. And I don't think he's converted Daniel Jones into a star quarterback, but what he's done is put Daniel Jones in a position where he's not going to lose lots of games for the team, and he can actually win a couple. They've got a lot of confidence. They've got a pretty strong defense. One of the best underlooked players, I think, in the league is Dexter Lawrence, their defensive tackle. And I think that they'll probably, it looks like, play Dallas in the first week. I think that'll be a very interesting game, actually. And I think, as Ger said, these are the glory days that fans over here especially remember, because the Giants, Washington, Dallas, and even occasionally the Eagles when the NFC East was the beast of a division. That was really good football and really good rivalries, and I'm really happy to see that back.
Mike, one last thing. When do you expect the NFL to make an official announcement about what's going to happen with that game and how they're going to account for it in the standings?
Well, they've said already, officially, that that game won't be played. They haven't announced exactly how they'll account for it in the standings. I suspect that what's going to happen is they're going to see how the dust flies and where it lands, and then they'll make a decision, and maybe hope that the results will make that decision easy to do. It would be extremely tough Buffalo to lose the top seed without losing a game that would have cost them that. Remember, they beat Kansas City earlier in the season in Kansas City, so they hold the tiebreaker over Kansas City. But if they win out, they become 13-4, and if Kansas City win, they become 14-3. So Kansas City would become the top seed unless they do something about it. I don't think something like playing on a short week would be fair to anybody, including the team that then would have to play in the playoffs the next week, and they would have to start rejigging the playoff schedule. So I get the sense that the easiest thing for them and the most practical would be to just play it as it lays and let it go. It's a tough break on Buffalo if that's the way the scenario works out.
So you give both teams a tie essentially.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Basically, and then that doesn't count really when they're figuring out winning percentage.
All right, Mike, great stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning. Cheers.
Oh, thanks, Ger.
It's Mike Carlson there. We'll obviously get him back over the next few weeks as the playoffs bubble up.